fighters. 11 o'clock high.
1943, the war in Europe was reaching fever pitch.
Okay, here they are. 9 o'clock high, enemy fighters. 6 o'clock, level. 2 more, 5. Watch it.
The men in these scenes aren't actors. Under orders of General Hap Arnold, this rare color footage was shot by cameramen who were assigned to follow the airmen of the 351st Bomb Group. From life in the barracks to highly dangerous daylight bombing missions deep in German territory. Every man flying with the 351st knew he had only one chance in 3 of returning from his mission safely.
Pull her up, Bart. Pull her up.
Well, they're just scary as you could imagine. And anybody that says they weren't scared just wasn't paying attention.
FW, 3 o'clock.
You could see airplanes spinning out of the air almost anywhere you look.
It was either stay with the plane and die now, or bail out and die later.
For nearly 60 years, the film was stored at the National Archives in Washington, D.C. What you are about to see is that footage. This is the true story of the men of the 351st and the incredible sacrifices they made in a do-or-die war. May 1943. Only 9 months earlier, the airmen in the 351st had been stationed at Geiger Field in Washington State. The nearly 7,000 men of the 351st made up one of the 48 bomb groups in the 8th Air Force. For the Americans who flew in the 351st Bomb Group, this was their home away from home, an Allied airfield near Polebrook, England, 70 miles northwest of London. Yanks who had only glimpsed Europe on a movie screen descended on this quiet English village of 400 people.
There had been the Pearl Harbor attack, and we were tremendously aware of the situation the country was in, and I wanted to have some part in making things right.
Around 20, everybody thinks they're immortal. It's going to happen to the other person and not to me. So basically that was the attitude, and we were so highly trained that we were chafing at the bit to get into it.
Seldom is heard, but it's encouraging word.
Most of the men were in their early 20s and just starting their lives. But they were young, tough, and came to Polebrook fully committed to the war effort.
I naturally hated Hitler, and also there was no getting out of it. I mean, I was engaged and very much in love, and the last thing I wanted to do was to leave my fiancée. But this is what was needed.
I was a man in a hurry. When I got there, my wife was 3 months pregnant, and I wanted to finish my missions before she had the baby so that she wouldn't have me to worry about.
Colonel Robert Burns was the group leader. In a war that devoured young men, he was the old man at 27.
It's amazing to me now in retrospect how little I fully appreciated what was going on in Europe when we went to Europe.
He had the awesome responsibility of sending these men out on these missions and knowing that some of them weren't coming back. 27 years of age. What an awesome responsibility that was.
So we sailed off to England, fat, dumb, and happy, thinking that, we're a match for anybody. And let me tell you, the awakening was rude.
Born intelligence officer.
As soon as they arrived at Polebrook, the men received orders to fly missions deep into the heart of Nazi Germany. Right from the start, the stakes were high. On August 17, 1943, the 8th Air Force launched 376 B-17s from Allied airfields in England. Crossing the English Channel, they began a long flight over Europe en route to major industrial targets in Germany. Colonel Burns and the men of the 351st were ordered to bomb a factory in Schweinfurt, Germany on that summer morning.
Schweinfurt was the home of the ball bearing industry for Germany, and as a strategic target
We were all thinking that if we could just destroy the ball bearing factories, the war would come to a screeching halt.
If you could attack the factories that made them and destroy them, you were going to cause havoc to the German war machine, because ball bearings are used by planes, tanks, trucks, you name it.
These bombing raids were conducted during daylight hours on a cloudless day, so the targets would be clearly visible. But that meant the big lumbering B-17s were clearly visible as well.
The targets were well in Germany, probably some 500 to 600 miles from bases in England, and that meant that for a long period the bombers were going to be over enemy territory, and that they were going to encounter fierce opposition from the enemy fighters.
As the bombers entered Germany, there were no Allied fighter planes that could protect them. The planes that escorted the bombers across the Channel could not hold enough fuel to make it to the targets and back.
In 1943, when the 351st started flying its missions, the only planes available to fly an escort didn't have the range to go all the way into Germany.
Instead, the B-17s were loaded with 9,000 rounds of 50 caliber ammunition. It could be fired from several gun ports on each plane.
I got him.
Military leaders believed this provided ample protection against the German fighters.
Here's bailing out either.
It didn't.
I saw my wingman get just disintegrated right off my right wing. You could see airplanes spinning out of the air almost anywhere you looked all the way in. Our force was attacked by German fighters in mid-channel on the way in, and the running battle went on all the way to Schweinfurt. We did do some damage, but we didn't paralyze the ball bearing industry.
During the raids on August 17, 60 B-17s went down. 600 men were killed, lost or wounded.
Very, very deadly business. There was probably no more dangerous job in the American Armed Services than being on a bomber crew in the 8th Air Force.
Morale plummeted and enlistment dwindled. 8th Air Force Commander General Hap Arnold took an unusual and highly dramatic step to rebuild his unit. He commissioned a film to be made to boost recruitment of Air Force gunners. In a brilliant move, he asked actor Clark Gable to participate in the filming.
We're turning a camera on everything and everybody.
Well, I know what General Arnold had in mind in having you make this gunner a picture. Captain Gable, our gunners are already the best in the business. But if they were only 10% better, it'd cost the Germans another 100 fighters a month.
Clark Gable was my mother's heartthrob, and you can understand that an awful lot of English women thought him to be the bee's knees, as we would say. And when the guys in the 351st heard that he was going to descend on them to make a documentary, they were delighted to have such a well-known character with them.
Gable's presence highlighted one of the great things about World War II and the American experience, and this was a war that everybody fought in. You have the president's sons, you have iron workers' sons, you have daughters of the elite going over as Red Cross donut girls. You've got everybody has a role in this, and Gable's participation would also help reinforce that sense that, you know, even Hollywood is here.
Living and flying with the 351st, Gable and his crew documented the day-to-day lives of the men and their missions. The cameramen were granted unprecedented access, mounting cameras from every angle in the planes, hangars, and barracks. Despite his fame, Gable and his camera crews quickly bonded with his fellow men of the 351st.
He was a well-known personage and all that, and sort of aloof. But after he was there for a while, he was out there playing softball on softball teams and all that.
He was very almost shy about venturing into groups of us. Well, some circumstances we were put together. He was as open and as just as normal a human being as you could walk.
Are you ready to go again? Sure. Got to get this thing over.
He was the same kind of guy in the movies as you saw on the ground. Just a real nice person. He didn't have to go, and he didn't have to fly 5 missions. So he stuck his neck out, and when he was flying in 43, it was tough, tough, tough.
Like the other men in the 351st, Gable had his own motivation for joining the Air Corps. Only a year earlier, his wife, actress Carol Lombard, was traveling across America urging citizens to buy war bonds when she was killed in a plane crash. These home movies show Gable and Lombard in the year before her death.
I just wondered if I had been in his shoes, if I'd have had the courage, integrity, or whatever it was to put it all and risk myself on this enterprise.
Clark Gable came to make a movie, but this was no Hollywood set. Both Gable and the men of the 351st would be placed directly in harm's way and have their harrowing experiences unfold right before the cameras. August 1943, camera crews were hard at work capturing the life and death struggles of the 351st Bomb Group. The Allied Air Force was focused on reducing the German air threat for the upcoming D-Day invasion. Britain's Royal Air Force bombed at night. The American 8th Air Force bombed by day.
The RAF had turned to night bombing early in the war because of the enemy defenses, but the Americans thought they could succeed where the British had failed, simply because their B-17s and B-24s were much more heavily armed than the RAF bombers.
The B-17 was known as the Flying Fortress because of its durability. The aircraft that carried the 351st into battle was built so solidly that it could withstand tremendous damage.
I've seen pictures of B-17s that were damaged that had an unbelievable amount of battle damage from German fighters and flak. Tails almost completely severed, wings with large holes, engines down, large cannon holes in the sides. And a lot of times the plane brought the crews home.
Well, you talk to any crew member of a B-17, and there's not another airplane like it. She's a little slow, but she'll get you there, and she'll take a lot of damage, and she'll bring you back. I've come back quite a few times with 1 or 2 engines missing, but she'll always bring you back.
The Flying Fortress supported a 10-man crew consisting of pilot, co-pilot, bombardier, radio operator, gunners, and the navigator whose job was to guide the plane to its targets and back home again. For navigator Bob Biley, there was only one bomber he felt safe in.
We had a choice of going into B-26, they called a Marauder. We called it a flying prostitute because it had no visible means of support. It had very short wings. The second was a B-24, and the third was a B-17. So I decided a B-17 was the best plane to fly in because it had some room for a navigator.
The B-17 may have been roomier, but crews on board endured the freezing temperatures of an unheated plane at high altitudes. The men relied on electrically heated suits.
It got really cold, like 40 below up there.
And the coldest that I ever documented, and it's in a little diary I have, was 67 degrees below zero. Below zero, not below freezing.
Bomb bay doors open.
The B-17 wasn't built for comfort. It was built to carry bombs. The freezing plane's normal payload was 12 500-pound bombs, which were usually dropped at 400-foot intervals. As the B-17s reached their destination, they were most vulnerable, flying without fighter escort.
Make a good run now, Steve. I'm on it.
Even with Nazi planes attacking, the bombers could make no evasive moves. The pilots had to fly in a smooth and steady formation if they wanted to hit their targets.
As they got over the target, the bombs were released, and that was always good to get rid of those.
Once the bombs were dropped, the dangerous journey home began. The B-17s often had to dodge metal fragments called flak, fired from ground forces below.
The flak was a terrible thing, but it's just tremendous. You feel like you could get out and walk on it. That's how bad it is.
But the B-17 was sturdy and often the difference between life and death during these daylight missions. Back at the base, the men painted names and images on the noses of their planes, as though creating a talisman against the dangers they confronted.
That was the first pilot's prerogative, to actually name an airplane. It gave this inanimate machine something akin to personality, and I guess that it actually made the machine more acceptable to you. It was as if it was an extension of yourself in a way.
Sometimes you'd have this patriotic piece of nose art with the number of missions marked around the edge with the bombs, and the number of German planes shot down. It was really a symbol of pride for the crews that flew in those planes.
My airplane, the Transit Bell, it's a trackless trolley with a very scantily clad, lovely miss sitting on top of it.
One squadron of the 351st became known as the Ball Boys. Inspired by the name of their former commander, Clint Ball, the men got creative with their nose art.
So all of our planes had the name Ball in it somewhere. We had a Lucille Ball, Loose Ball, Heavy Ball, it's just right on down the line.
A lot of them named their planes after their wives or their loved ones. They were a sense of home for a lot of them. I've pretty bawdy, some of it.
The female form, I estimate, was on 75% of the aircraft. And when I say the female form, it was usually an undressed female form. The boys, well, boys will be boys.
The camera crews caught the boys pursuing local girls.
Baltimore cultured as a group went into the nearby villages to visit the quaint old cathedrals, churches and shops. Or on days when they were confined near the base, the old cathedrals and shops would come out to see them.
As captured on film, the 351st's humor in the face of adversity even spread to the living quarters and mess hall.
We have a fellow that was a tail gunner, and he had been the head chef at Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer. And when Gable got there, he saw the guy, and he got him off the crew, and he became the mess sergeant for the officers' mess in the 351st.
Hello, Captain Gable.
What's this? I thought you were a ball tail gunner.
I thought so too, sir, but I've been grounded.
Oh, your past crept up on you, huh?
So we did eat pretty good in the officers' mess over there. So he did have that, and basically that might have helped our morale too.
Humor and good food boosted morale, but it was the camaraderie among the men that kept them going.
You really have a brotherly feeling toward the people in your crew. You're gonna fly with them, and you're gonna take the same chances that they do, and you're gonna help each other anytime you can.
The crews were very tight. You lived and died literally with these people. And you learned to rely on everyone, and it really helped get everybody through the missions, the sense that you had faith in your crew and everybody was working together and trying to perform the mission, win the war, and also get home alive. And that helped a great deal.
As the men of the 351st were about to find out, the bonds that they formed would be vital to their survival in the coming months as they prepared to face their toughest missions in the war. September 1943. As winter approached, the men flying with the 351st Bomb Group faced a grim reality. Less than half of the men were surviving their tour of missions. P-47 fighter planes accompanied the bombers for part of the mission. Because of their limited range, the escort planes had to turn back before the most difficult and vulnerable part of the mission. After that point, the B-17s had nothing to protect them but their own guns in a close formation.
Very complicated choreography to set up these combat formations, but the idea was that you provide massive firepower all around these planes to make it very difficult for German fighters to get through.
Although the formations were formidable and the firepower was massive from a B-17 formation, that didn't stop the German Luftwaffe fighters coming to grips and becoming very successful in downing B-17s.
Camera crews continued to film hundreds of hours of missions.
5
throw it any higher than that. Where do you want to have it, in the bomb bay? Why don't you lean out and smell it? Okay, here they are. 9 o'clock high, enemy fighters. 6 o'clock, level. 2 more, 5. Watch it. You got the colonel's wingman. Smoking on number 4. You got one out of the high squadron. Yep. No chance there.
But actor Clark Gable didn't want to be a distant observer. He decided to fly with the bombers on several raids himself.
Clark Gable was in the 351st at the early stage. He was there in 1943 at the worst part of the war, when you only had a chance of about 33% of surviving.
Gable's fame made him a particularly attractive target for the Luftwaffe and for Adolf Hitler. Hitler offered a reward to anyone who shot down or captured the actor.
The Germans really wanted to shoot down Clark Gable. That would have been a real coup to the Germans from a propaganda standpoint.
Despite the risk, Gable and his crew joined Colonel Robert Burns on a mission to take out a harbor at Nantes in Nazi-occupied France on September 23, 1943.
The mission this day was down to Nantes. A German battleship was at anchor there, and that was our target.
Gable recorded his own impressions of bombing the harbor on that mission.
You can't hear what's going on down there, 5 miles below you. But marshalling yards and chemical tanks, ships and warehouses, spare engines and ball bearing factories are disintegrating in molten chaos.
And we squeezed on through the low part, found the target, bombed it, and started back.
After he dropped his payload, Burns' real trouble began. He could see danger brewing as he turned back toward England.
Now I can see that we're down around 10,000 feet. And on the far side of the low point, I can see these German fighters just boiling, taking off, going there, and they're going to be waiting for us on the other side of this cloud mass. Now, merciful God, this is an invitation to a massacre. Out of the mist was the whole German fleet coming at us.
They know exactly where you are. They've been watching the stratosphere condense off your wingtips.
I just made a decision right then that I wasn't going to deliberately fly into it. So I flew into the cloud, or toward the cloud mass, as close as I could possibly get, and immediately did a 90-degree turn. We shuffled the deck, and not a shot was fired by them or us. It happened so quick that you barely could notice it happening. So that was our encounter with the German Air Force.
In a matter of seconds, the clouds blinded both Allied and Luftwaffe planes so that they could not engage in combat. It was a moment of sheer luck. Footage from that day shows Clark Gable and Robert Burns, tired but thankful to make it back alive after the Nantes mission.
It had a happy ending in that we all got back to England.
You're just glad to be back on the ground, and thank your lucky stars that you were able to make it, because it was so close.
I would ask myself what it was that got me through. Was it good training? Was it good technology that the plane, good maintenance? Was it God? Or was it luck? I kind of prefer luck, but I haven't really made up my mind, and I don't think I have to.
The relief was bittersweet as the airmen realized that some of their squad weren't as lucky.
It was really a bad feeling to walk in your hut and see 4 or 5 empty bunks, and the summary court officer would come around to gather their personal effects and everything, and it was a sad situation. I mean, it had to affect you one way or another. You hated to lose friends, and you did have friends.
But there was little time to mourn. Within weeks, the men of the 351st would face more life and death drama in their next big push on the march to D-Day.
No, he's going low. Here he comes up.
November 1943. It had been 9 months since camera crews began filming the day-to-day existence of the 351st Bomb Group as they fought the enemy in the skies above Europe.
One shot out of the tail, two out of the waist. The other two boys out of the nose.
Clark Gable's missions became the stuff of legend among the 351st.
He wore cowboy boots, which wasn't a regulation, but he got by with it. He had the heel of his cowboy boot blown off by a piece of shrapnel. That's how close it was.
There may have been a bit of Hollywood hyperbole here. It was said on one occasion a cannon shell passed within 6 inches of his head.
After 9 combat months and shooting 50,000 feet of film, Gable and his cameramen returned to the United States. Their mission was to boost the morale of the men in the 351st and their fellow airmen. It was a success.
Enemy of America, look at these men. They're not going to lose, brother.
The actor and his cameras were gone, but the war was far from over. Plans were underway for a major attack that would hopefully turn the tide of World War II.
Remember, you route in to this DR point where you go northeast to avoid this black area.
In February 1944, the 351st prepared for a week-long series of strikes, now called Big Week. At the time, it was a top-secret plan, codenamed Operation Argument. More than 1,000 bombers, escorted by more than 800 U.S. and RAF fighters, were to attack German aircraft factories. Allied forces were determined to stop the manufacture of German warplanes.
Now, this was preceding the June the 6th, 1944 invasion of the continent. So therefore, in order to help prepare for the invasion in June on the French coast, we knew that you had to knock out the Luftwaffe, the German Air Force.
All the groups in the 8th Air Force were put on what was known as a maximum effort, i.e. every airplane that could be flown in combat and every combat crew to man them would be utilized. And this was the all-out attempt to try to destroy German aircraft production.
On the night of February 19, 1944, group commanders received orders. Big Week was to begin the next morning. Anxiety was high the night before the mission.
You really never got a real deep sleep the night before you were going to have to fly on a bombing mission. And when the guy put the flashlight in your face and woke you up, you were it.
And about 2 or 3 in the morning, you'd hear a knocking on the door, and some fellow in a loud voice with a flashlight would come barging into the room, shine the flashlight in your eyes, and get up. Time for a briefing. Mission day.
Breakfast at 3, briefing at 4.
On February 20th, David Matthews was stationed at a nearby airbase when he learned his brother Archie was to fly from Polebrook.
I was talking with a friend of mine, and he says to me, I understand you have a brother over here that's a gunner in a B-17 outfit. And I said, yes, I do. And I don't mind telling you I'm very apprehensive about the whole thing, and I'm worried. You can tell from the activity going around the space right now that there's something big coming up, and I'm worried about Archie.
Before dawn that day, Archie Matthews and his 9 crew members waited nervously inside the plane known as 10 horsepower. It was only their second mission as a crew. The plane, with 5 missions in its logbooks, had already seen more combat than the men it was about to carry into battle. The average age of the men in this crew was 23 years old. Pilot Dick Nelson Jr. and co-pilot Ronald Bartley would fly the plane. Walter Trumper would navigate. Carl Moore was the top turret gunner. Radio operator Joe Rex was the youngest man in the crew. Gunner Archie Matthews was in the ball turret, a plastic sphere in the belly of the plane that spun in all directions so he could fire at enemy planes wherever they were.
Archie was the smallest in the crew, so he volunteered to be a ball turret gunner.
I wouldn't want to be a ball turret gunner. You'd either be claustrophobic, it's a very dangerous place to be. But I think you have to emphasize the fact that everybody shared the danger on these flights.
Tom Sowell and Russell Robinson stood ready to fire the waist guns just behind the ball turret. At the rear of the plane, Mac Hagbo was tail gunner. 10 horsepower was just one of the 351st planes flying that day. 20 planes would form a formation heading for aircraft factories in Leipzig, roughly 80 miles south of Berlin. At 8:45 a.m., a green flare signaled the planes to start their engines. 10 horsepower was supposed to be the 15th plane to take off. But as Lieutenant Nelson gave the already signal to ground crew, a Jeep cut in front of the plane. Nelson was forced to swerve, leaving 10 horsepower stuck in the mud. It became the last plane to take off, a straggler, an easy mark for enemy attack.
And most of the American airmen knew that if they were a straggler, if their aircraft had lost contact with a major group, they were dead meat.
At 9:40 a.m., 10 horsepower finally lifted off. As they raced to catch up to the rest of the 351st planes, their risk intensified.
To hold formation, you had to be extremely careful that you didn't collide with another aircraft, and you often encountered prop wash from aircraft ahead, which could throw you out of formation if you weren't careful.
It didn't take long for the Luftwaffe to find the group. By noon, as the planes flew over Germany, they met heavy resistance.
Pull her up, Bart. Pull her up.
Despite the intensity of the attacks, 351st gunners shot down 3 enemy Messerschmitts, damaged a 4th, and dropped bombs on the targets below.
MW, 3 o'clock. 2 190s, high.
But that didn't stop the Luftwaffe, who were circling 10 horsepower. 2 Messerschmitt 109s suddenly attacked the bomber. 20-millimeter cannon shells shattered the co-pilot's overhead window and exploded in the cockpit.
I remember the pilot calling to say we're climbing out on 23.5 and all is clear, and I hear that there's fighters in the area, so watch out. So the first plane come from in 1 o'clock high, and it decapitated co-pilot. And knocked the pilot's right side of the face off, and he was unconscious.
The pilotless plane began to plummet as the Luftwaffe attacks continued. Now, crew members who had never flown a plane before would have to learn fast or die.
So Carl Moore was flying top turret. He got a hold of the control and pushed the co-pilot and the pilot back in their seat and pulled it out. He didn't do a professional job because he wasn't a professional. I remember then that the navigator said, Carl, take a heading of 360, that was due north toward England, and stay in the cloud. Mount your gun because we may have fighters coming in through the cloud.
10 horsepower was heavily damaged. Its cockpit was shattered. Its radio shot out, and its sides riddled with holes. Yet the flying fortress was sturdy. But could it make it back to Polebrook?
Lieutenant Trumper was the only officer left on board, and they decided to fly back to England. Walter gave everybody the opportunity, do you want to bail out now or stay on the aircraft as long as you can? Everybody said, let's stay with it as long as we can.
The plane's windshield was shattered. Temperatures in the aircraft were 50 below zero.
Their hands were just blistered, their face was just so cold they couldn't feel anything. As they're getting closer to getting out of enemy territory, they decide to move Lieutenant Nelson. And all along they thought Lieutenant Nelson was also dead, and it's when they went to move him that they realized that he was still alive.
10 horsepower's pilot was bleeding and knocked unconscious. Fuel was running low. Archie, Walter, and Joe took turns flying the plane, trying to make it home against impossible odds. When they saw a coastline ahead, they prayed that it was England. February 20th, 1944, an emergency call came into the control tower at the air base at Polebrook. 10 horsepower was heavily damaged. No one on board knew if they could make it back to base.
I was in the control tower when that airplane came back over England, and we got the word that that the pilot was dead, the co-pilot was unconscious but still living, and the navigator and maybe the crew chief had flown the airplane, and they had found Polebrook.
10 horsepower was given immediate clearance to land. Gunner-turned-pilot Archie Matthews was at the flight controls as Lieutenant Trumper relayed landing instructions from Polebrook Tower. But Archie wasn't sure he could land the B-17.
So both the group commander and I then went to 2 different airplanes, each of us flying an airplane to try to let them fly on us and we'd get them to the ground. They couldn't stay, they didn't know enough about handling the airplane to even stay in the air with us. And as a matter of fact, it was a threat then to everybody to try to do more with them.
The gunners were ordered to bail out one by one.
Russell Robinson, the other waist gunner, and Rex, we broke our legs. We bailed out 3 of them, 3 out of 5. Because then Carl and back bailed out, no problem.
Archie Matthews, Walter Trumper, and the unconscious pilot Nelson were the only ones left on board.
The group commander and I pled with them to bail out of the airplane.
Walter Trumper radioed over to him and said, "No, we refuse to leave our pilot, Lieutenant Nelson, in this aircraft, and we would like to try to land again."
So they sought some empty, open field to try to put it on the ground, and I guess unbeknownst to them, the ground sloped up into a little ridge, and they did get it to the ground, but when it hit this ridge, it just nosed and tumbled and totally exploded.
Instantly, Archie Matthews was killed and Walter Trumper were both killed instantly in the crash. Their pilot, Lieutenant Nelson, was actually survived the impact of the crash. The base doctor said if they would have been able to land the airplane, he would have survived the wounds that he had received over Leipzig, and he was just unconscious in the aircraft the whole time.
The story of 10 horsepower became headline news and its crew members instant heroes. But for some, the news came as a shock. David Matthews learned the sad truth from a local paper.
That night of the 21st, I happened to pick up a paper on the chair right next to me. And there was a picture of Archie on the very front page and a picture of Max Hagbo parachuting down over the base. And I thought, oh my God, Archie is dead.
As survivors of 10 horsepower recovered from their injuries, awards for valor were presented to the living and the dead. Tom Sowell, Russell Robinson, and Joe Rex all received the Purple Heart. Rex also earned the Silver Star. Carl Moore received the Distinguished Service Cross for helping to fly the plane. Nelson, Bartley, Trumper, and Matthews were all posthumously awarded the Purple Heart. Archie Matthews and Walter Trumper, who lost their lives trying to rescue their pilot, were awarded the Medal of Honor, the military's highest distinction.
It was only apropos that he would win that medal because you go back to the scriptures, John 15, chapter 13 verse, which states, "Greater love has no man than this, that you give up your life for friends," which he did.
Thanks to the sacrifices of 10 horsepower, its men became the most highly decorated crew in the 8th Air Force. Their final mission helped the 351st to reduce the threat from the German Air Force, paving the way for D-Day.
There is no doubt that the devastation caused, the destruction to factories, the destruction to the railroad system, communication system, above all, the oil plants, was really decisive in bringing about victory.
But the success of the 351st came at a heavy price. Over the course of the war, more than 175 aircraft and their crews were lost. Many more were wounded or taken as prisoners of war.
It's just a sign of what these people were willing to go through to accomplish the mission. And they were an essential element of the team that won World War II.
One by one, as the men of the 351st completed their tour of at least 25 missions, they were sent home. Arriving back in the States, they saw the world through different eyes.
When we actually got to New York, we sailed very slowly past the Statue of Liberty. On my 22nd birthday. Boy, what a birthday present.
The homecoming was a little bittersweet because, you know, we'd done a lot of destruction in Europe.
People should never lose sight of the fact that these young men who gave their lives or fought so gallantly did it for a good cause. The Nazi tyranny was the biggest tyranny of the 20th century, and these young men overcame that tyranny.
I wouldn't take anything, hardly, for the experience and the adventure and the pride and the accomplishment and, of course, getting back. But I wouldn't give you a nickel to do it again.
Once you came through alive, it was something you could look back on and be proud of, that you were part of that period of history. I was proud of the fact I was in the 351st.
Today, there are several public memorials to the 351st, celebrating its contribution toward winning the war. And at Polebrook, England, the barracks and mess hall are gone. But the spirit of the 351st lives on.
Were there ghosts? I don't believe in ghosts, but there was something there, some sort of aura about the place, as if all the action that had gone on there, all the sacrifice, all the noise, all the laughter, had somehow had an effect on that little piece of England. And I think it's still there.
But perhaps the greatest memento is the hundreds of hours of film shot of the 351st. It was originally an experiment, but it now stands as the most vivid account of the men of the 351st and their missions.
You know, the story of combat is as old as mortal men. When the times and the tasks demonstrate themselves so that there's no question with what has to be done, people will rise to the occasion.